And I am joined now by Reverend Sami Wainaina, Provost at the All Saints Cathedral. We were having that conversation before the break, and he's still joining us virtually. Provost, thank you for staying with us. Now, you said that the Archbishop yesterday drew the line, but we have seen it is quite a clear contrast from between the Christians and our Muslim brothers and sisters, whereby when anyone goes to the mosque, regardless of their political stature or position in society or even otherwise, they take whatever position they find themselves. Why is there that much consideration, especially in churches, of even seating arrangements in order of hierarchy? I mean, it's not something we see with our Muslim brothers and sisters.
Well, there are two institutions or more which have been hijacked by politicians. I think the first one is the media. Media doesn't go to the mosque as much. They don't. And I talked to a Muslim friend of mine who actually said politicians actually do speak, but it is controlled. In fact, there's a committee that controls what they say. That is one institution that has been taken away. The other one is the church. I think the Christian culture and the Muslim culture is different. Maybe we tend to be rather accommodated, and we are not as structured as the Muslims. And we tend to be a little more accommodating. But what I find interesting is I have seen a Muslim coming to a church on a Sunday to do politics. So while we could say they don't do it in their mosques, how can a Muslim then come on a Sunday? We even allow them to make politics there. It tells you that truly we have a challenge in the church. We have not drawn the line. We have this problem in the society where we see people in terms of the position they hold. In the cathedral, generally there are no reserved seats. But when somebody like senior, like a president or the deputy, informs us that they will be coming, yes, we reserve seats for their security, definitely. But in the cathedral, for the years I've been there, we have not had special preferences to politicians. But that's about the cathedral. I know that is not what is happening, especially in the general church setting. And that is very sad. But listening to the two archbishops yesterday, I think it was clear. Politicians are not special people. The poor, the rich, whichever status you are, you're welcome to the church. And I'd like to correct something that I've heard a politician say, that we should consider because Jesus welcomed everybody. The archbishops never talked of politicians not coming to church. What he said is come, worship, and go. So I want to agree with you. I think there's a big difference between the Muslim culture and the Christian culture. And I think what we are learning as Christians is to draw a line and say everybody who comes to church on Sunday is a worshiper, and that is all. And the priest should take control. Mm-hmm. But let me also say, the commercialization has also brought its own problem because there are clergy who would like to take advantage of politicians being there. And as much as the church depends on politicians for fundraising, then we'll have sold the church to the devil.
Exactly. Provost, this brings the conversation on funding because, granted, these places of worship, that is the churches, are constructed using funds, using money, and perhaps one of the ways of, fundraising is using, those who are presumed to be strong financially or in their pockets, and perhaps politicians appear to top that list. So that when there is a church service, or rather when there is a need to fundraise for anything, be it to construct a church or even to support a certain group, then it is believed that it is better to combine a church service and then the fundraiser later. And because sometimes perhaps the politicians come in a rush, they are then given the priority to even address the congregants, give their contribution, and then go. And perhaps that's when all this started, this long chain. So moving forward, what would be your ideal suggestion? Because the church still needs money, but then what would be another way of just ensuring that all this is done in accordance with following the scripture and also the guidelines that you've given?
Well, the church has to decide, because if you invite politicians for fundraising, it is like they have bought the space, the airtime to do politics. Therefore, the church can fundraise differently. I think the church is suffering from a societal problem of greed. Generally in this country, you see a lot of greed in everything we do, and we want to be the top. And you see a lot of competition between churches. Who has the biggest building, who is popular, who is known. At the moment churches get into that, then you start seeing this problem. My advice to churches is teach your people the truth of Scripture. Teach them to give without showing. As Jesus said, the left and the right should not know. And that meant that whenever we give to God, it's a way of worship. This display of money in public is actually wrong. Let's accept where we have been wrong. And the Archbishop did say yesterday that he banned announcement of monies in public. And I have been with him in a fundraiser, and he will not allow it. And I wish the Anglican Church, where the Archbishop is in charge, can take that as a fatherly advice, because the Archbishop is trying to protect the church. I can tell you, since churches closed in March last year, it's now almost getting to 2 years. I have seen in the cathedral, we've not done fundraisings. We have shared the need to our members, and we have seen them give quietly. In fact, I can tell you, I don't know who gives. And we have taught them, one, to earn their wealth in the right manner. So we need to conscientize our people that God is not just pleased with the gift that people give, but also the source of that gift. And God just judges us accordingly. Therefore, teach our people to work hard, to earn wealth, and be able to give without display. If we teach that over some years, you can be sure we will have created a culture that is different from the one that we are experiencing. And I have seen it in the cathedral. The church has been sustained for 2 years without display, without fundraising. So it is doable. Even down in the villages, it depends on the clergy. To me, the biggest challenge that I see in the church today are the clergy. If the clergy would take the Christian etiquette and decorum, we should be able to have this culture trickle down to the smallest church. And by the way, churches don't need to be big. They don't need to have big buildings. Churches is a gathering of the people. So this competition about money and outdoing each other in terms of denominations is actually wrong. Mm-hmm. So for me, what I have learned moving forward, preach the word, people will give.
Indeed, Provost, the church in the 80s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s was very vocal and would even call out politicians, the elected leaders, for their greed or even their involvement in corruption, and would even provide the way and the proper correction for the society. But that appeared to have died down, especially even more with the the introduction of fundraising and allowing politicians to convert pulpits into places where they will address the public. So with this new guidelines and where you say the Archbishop has drawn the line, even by what you said earlier on, are we saying that perhaps the church, the voice of the church, will be as bolder as it was back then?
Still bold, but the two contexts are different. The context in which Archbishop Gitari, Dingi Mwanzeki, Njoya, and the others were is slightly different from the one we have. Remember, at that time, it was Kanu government, and the church became like the opposition. And they spoke on behalf of the people. Then later, maybe during the Mwai Kibaki's presidency, people tended to relax because Mwai Kibaki was not too political. He would go to church and don't even say a word. And we started slowly accommodating politicians into our church. Now, what is sad in our time is that the opposition that is meant to keep the government in check has now become part and parcel of the government. So the executive has been extended. Although the handshake brought its own peace, the handshake also killed the opposition. And I think now where the church is finding itself is going back to its roots, where it must continuously speak. And this thing of compartmentalizing the church, that you shouldn't speak politics, you should only speak matters of the gospel. But the same politicians who tell us that are the same ones who wants to come to church and take advantage of the congregants. We must say no to it. And I think you'll agree with me that the church is becoming bolder. We have realized that we became accommodative. And in the name of being accommodative, the politicians took away the church. We must return the church to its rightful position. And I think moving forward, you will hear more and more sermons from the cathedral. I can promise you, our Archbishop has come out, the Catholics are coming out. I would wish all churches would do the same and speak the truth and hold people accountable.
Provost, there is this other issue of the mushrooming churches, the upcoming churches, which by far need support, and some of them you find they're actually in the rural areas where finances may not be such, they may not be in plenty, and therefore the local leaders, the area leaders, even national leaders perhaps will use the chance, while they may even want to give generously and mean the best intentions, then they're given a chance and then they end up speaking. But even as you approach 2022, are you confident that perhaps the trend that has started right now with the Archbishop of ACK and also the Catholic Archbishop Muheria issuing those stands, are you perhaps confident that the political temperatures will even go lower and the church will have its place in society by even correcting politicians and the electorate as well?
We'll try to push the limits. That one I'll be sure. Whether it is funerals or church services. To me, this boils down to the clergy. If the clergy are not confident enough to say no, it will be very sad. But can I bring a different perspective? Sometimes clergy are willing, but sometimes congregations as well demand for the politicians to speak. I think what the Archbishop did yesterday is to come out courageously and boldly, and the congregants kept quiet. They didn't demand, because I have known of a bishop who was almost roughed up in a funeral because he said no to politicians. So the church sometimes can find itself in a very precarious position. But given the advice that came out yesterday from the two archbishops, the clergy should feel strengthened to be able to say no. They should just conduct the service. Isn't it sad that in a political rally, I, as a priest, I would not be allowed to say anything. But then they want to say something in church. And I think that is what happened yesterday, and we said no. About the mushrooming churches, it's rather unfortunate. And unless the government does something, it will get worse, because now churches are becoming personal or a family business, unfortunately, and people will take advantage. The moment you invite a politician, and politicians, let's say this, they are not good people. They are people who are greedy and take advantage of situations for their own selfish gains. So that giving you are saying generously to the church, it is not. It is actually to buy people. Our politicians will never do something for free. And that's why they can't give quietly. They have to show people that I'm the generous guy here. But all that they are doing is to buy people's favor. So as we move now to the electioneering time, by the end of this year, and temperatures are getting higher and into next year, churches should say no and no completely. But those mushrooming churches, especially in the rural parts of Kenya, they should heed to this. If we don't do, and I told people in another interview, the example of Rwanda. Rwanda, when the Hutus and Tutsis were hating each other, it was in the FM radios, but even in churches. If you go to Rwanda, there are churches that are monuments where people were killed in their hundreds, and it is a very sad state. So the church should not think they will be spared if this country burns. We saw that in 2002, 2007 especially, 2008, that even churches were burnt and people were burnt inside churches. Who does that? It is the politicians. So while they are our brothers and sisters, the church must squarely put them in where they belong.
Indeed, Provost, as we bring this conversation to a close, where then does the flock, begin to take stock, think about how they have been treating the church, that is the buildings and the places of worship, because the church, as you know, it is a community of believers. But then how do you then guide and change the mindset? Because there are those who have now conditioned themselves to think that perhaps introducing or allowing politicians to take the front and center stage is perhaps the way to go due to the harsh economic times. How then do you guide your flock, the flock in general in Kenya, to just change their mindset and then begin to follow the doctrines and the teachings of the Bible and the regulations of the church?
I see two ways to do it. First of all is internally. The Archbishop of the Anglican Church gave directive yesterday in the Anglican Church, meaning that the bishops should pick cue from there. We senior clergy must pick cue from that, and it must trickle down. You can imagine if every clergy and bishop in the Anglican Church took that directive, in a month or two, we'll have changed the culture and we will have sent a strong message. Like now, in the cathedral, you don't expect such things to happen. Why? Me as the provost, I have given that directive in the past. The Archbishop has continued to do that. And yesterday, he came out even more clearly. In other words, a culture has been created. Anybody allowing politicians to speak in the church, people will wonder, didn't you hear what the Archbishop said? Look at the Catholics. If they could hear Archbishop Muheria, let me tell you, the Catholic Church will have created a culture. And they are the two biggest churches. I expect the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Pentecostals to come out and give similar directives. Otherwise, if we contradict each other, it will be wrong. But can we also say this? Even when others will do it, The Anglicans and the Catholics have come out clearly to say, we will not allow. That is one way. The internal discipline that is required is important. And I think that's the directive that came out yesterday from the two archbishops. The second one is the umbrella bodies, the NCCK, where the Anglican Church falls, the EAK, the Catholic Conference of Bishops. Those bodies can meet individually, but also meet together, because there's now need for collaboration. They met together, they would do two things. One, give directives on how politicians should behave in churches. Number two is to come up with qualities and qualifications that we need to consider as we look at the leaders, our political leaders in the future. So the church can play an important role. We may not say go for so-and-so, but we can be able to say, don't elect such a person. Elect such a person in terms of quality, in terms of experience, and integrity. The church can be able to guide people, but they should also have internal disciplines that are important.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, that is Reverend Sammy Wainaina, Provost at the All Saints Cathedral here in Nairobi. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Great. I've been speaking to Reverend Sammy Wainaina.